Normally, I would get this up about a game. Normally, I wouldn't get this up about a game. But my YouTube audience really want me to be a Bengals fan. They've gotten really annoyed at me. Some of the people who knew me when I was wearing my Bengals hat every day have gotten really annoyed with me that I've switched to this Jazz hat. And I have done my best. I have done my level best not to let these losses, these Jake Browning and then that first Joe Flacco loss, to affect me negatively, emotionally at all. And my girlfriend just happens to be a Steelers fan. And so do I. I love the Steelers, actually. And I love Mike Tomlin. And so the extra little spice on top of this week of the trade and the quote from Mike Tomlin calling out Andrew Berry, and just the extra little bit that was on top of this game. Not to mention the huge improbability that the Bengals turn the season around if Joe Flacco doesn't find a way to win this game. And then my own Joe Flacco apologetics over the last 20 years of NFL football. Like, just so much was wrapped up in tonight. Even my own belief and my ability to observe what I've been seeing through 6 weeks of what I've watched of football for 20 years. I told my girlfriend, she asked me to call it. She asked me to put my finger on it and call it. Call this game. And I said, okay, I'll call this game like I'm betting on it. I would bet one of two things would happen. So if I were going to bet the odds, I would bet that the Steelers are going to win 31-13. The Bengals are going to come out flat. They're going to come out flat, and they just aren't going to get anything going until the end of the game. They're going to put up 6 points in the first half. Maybe they won't even put up anything, and they'll put up 6 points coming out of half, and then they'll kick a field, or they'll score a touchdown or some dumb shit. I don't know, 13 points. And then I said, but in my heart, what I think is actually going to happen is I think Joe Flacco is going to lead the Bengals to a 33-31 victory. And now everyone listening to this who actually watched the game is going, horseshit, you called that. I told my girlfriend it was going to be 31-13, and the Bengals were going to kick a game-winning field goal as time expired. I was off by 7 seconds. And you might notice that I might be a little bit different. I couldn't watch that game sober. So I went and I slammed 4 Yinglings. And I'm still a little bit drunk. But I feel good about that one. I feel good. I feel good about that win because I called it. I said if the Bengals can find a way this season to control a game by running the ball and throwing it to Chase every down, you throw the ball to Chase, and finding Higgins when it mattered, they could win this game. I said it all day. If they could just get a decent offense going, just a little bit of consistency. My walk back was fine, Gina. And they did. They put together a little bit of consistency. Not a lot. But Flacco looks so good. There's a certain part of me that wonders if Burrow was watching that. And if he'll watch the tape. Because there were a few of those drives where Flacco looked like the superior quarterback to Aaron Rodgers. And for just a minute in my life, I could say that my favorite team, the team that I I put my emotional fucking bones on. Forever that was the Dolphins, but for tonight, I could say that the team that I put my emotional fucking trust in had the best quarterback on the field. And tonight, Flacco looked better. He just looked better. And he's only had something stupid like 7 days with his team. And so just for tonight, I'm not rubbing it in my girlfriend's face. Her team lost, and I don't feel great about that. But her team is not any longer a game ahead of my team. And Zach Taylor's not going to get fired. Because if they were bad, if they came out and lost 13-31, that was the other half of my prediction, is Zach Taylor wasn't going to survive. And Zach Taylor's my guy. Zach Taylor's my guy. Thanks, Siggs. I was just talking about that. That was a good win. Chase looks so good. But he had two minor mental errors that could have made that game look way different. It doesn't matter. To me, I don't need to harp on Chase. Chase is still a very young, very rich man. If he wants to be where the Bengals could be, he'll catch those balls. I was explaining to Eric, those of you may know Eric here from the channel, but I was explaining to Eric that Chase is that Joe Flacco has never had a wide receiver like Jamar Chase. He's never dropped back and always had a guy just wide open. You could see it. There was a throw. Flacco hit Chase right in the hands, and Chase let his concentration slip for a second. Because he's wide the fuck open. He's wide the fuck open on every play. Every single play. How do you get locked in if you're Jamar Chase and you're that open every play? They can't throw it to you every play, and not every play can be a design throw to you. How do you get locked in if you're Higgins? How do you not make mental errors if you're the guy who's not Jamar Chase? And then how do you not have a few mental errors if you're that naturally gifted? He is wide open every play. The difference in a completion and an incompletion as far as not getting, like, for a defense, is throwing lanes. It's crazy. Flacco could have dropped back and thrown it to him 25 or 30 times, Jamar Chase, and they still would have won. Could have. That was a great game. That was a fun watch. And Aaron Rodgers was Aaron Rodgers. I really thought there for a minute at the beginning of the game that if the defense didn't figure out a way to make a stop or get a couple of, not a stop, to force a punt or get a couple of turnovers, this game is going to get ugly. And they did. They forced a punt, and they got two picks, I think. So I feel really good about that win. And again, Rach, I'm not rubbing this in your face. I would never. It's more about I was starting to doubt myself. I shouldn't have, but that game, the Bengals were putting me in doubt. I was getting so many other teams. I have been getting so many other teams right, like Sam Darnold. I feel really good about calling Sam Darnold out this season as somebody who's going to have a really good season. I feel really good about calling for Baker Mayfield as MVP. But none of it matters because I don't bet, right? And so I don't put money on it. I don't wager. I don't bet on this stuff. Nobody really gives a shit what I think. But I was really starting to feel down on myself, like, oh, man, I can't believe I was so wrong about Browning. And then the defense the Bengals defense just fallen absolutely to pieces on Sunday. Just, like, really had me questioning, like, everything I knew about football. It had me ready. It had me ready to just like hit the eject button on the whole season. Like, just get me out of this emotionally. I can't handle it. And then Zach Taylor didn't get fired. And everything's okay. Oof. Guillermo, I could have told you that was a mistake, buddy. I said it. I've said it all week. I've said it all season. Every time anybody came around and was like, "Oh, what do you think about the Bengals?" I said, if Zach Taylor remembers to run directly at the Steelers' defense for 3 quarters, the first 3 quarters, they will win this game. And then this is not to throw shade at you, Guillermo, but while we were watching the game, my buddy Eric, who doesn't really, he knows football from Blitz, from NFL Blitz, so he knows it from an arcade simulation that's not really the NFL. And so he was saying, man, the quarterback could just take off and run to the left side of the defense. He'd been saying it the whole game. And so when Flacco takes off and runs on that naked boot and got that 11-yard scramble, sure, they didn't do anything with the drive after that, but he'd been calling it the whole game. And so I'm just thinking to myself, like, if somebody who only knows the game from playing an arcade game can see that the Steelers defense has gaping holes in it, Zach Taylor has got to be able to. Joe Flacco has got to be able to exploit them. The Steelers are old. That defense is old. That isn't to say that they're not veterans and they're not still very good, but they're old. Old and injury prone at this point. And so no, you weren't hearing a lot like, oh, Cam Hayward and what's his name? Bosa, right? Is it Bosa or Watt? TJ Watt. I think it's TJ Watt. That they were hurt, they were banged up, they weren't on the field, or Ramsey was banged up or hurt or whatever. You weren't hearing a lot of that like you were hearing in week 2 or 3 or whichever game that was. But I just kept saying it. If you just keep running it at them, their conditioning is poor because they're old, and you can pop a few big runs. And if you just keep throwing it at Chase. They must have thrown it to him 19 times tonight. Higgins had three or five. That's such a good game. I feel really good about that one. I feel really good about that one. Just for my own personal ability to look at the season landscape and call a game. So if I had bet money on that one, I would have won money because I called the score even 33-31, 2 interceptions by the Steelers. Like I feel really good about that. I feel really good about that. But it only counts if people say it counts. And so I'm just going to have to beat up my girlfriend. Like, see, I'm smart. Give me sex now. She's going to say, stop. Leave me alone. And I respect that. Because I smell like farts. All right. We are going to read tonight from Edward Bulwer Lytton's The Coming Age. Ooh. I'll have to deal with that tomorrow. Brotato has a beta already. Save profiles. No, okay, I don't need that. Never mind. I don't want to play that beta. Kindle takes forever to boot up, evidently. Now is when we get our pre-reading chatter out. Because we're going to jump right into chapter 14. From Edward Bulwer Lytton's The Coming Age. Chapter 14. Though, as I have said, the Vrilya discourage all speculations on the nature of the Supreme Being, they appear to concur in a belief by which they think to solve that great problem of the existence of evil, which has so perplexed the philosophy of the upper world. They hold that wherever he was once given life with the perceptions of that life, however faint it be, as in a plant, the life is never destroyed. Actually, give me 1 second. I have to find this. I didn't realize I left one of my earbuds in. And that's going to bother me when I let it die. Because I might want that if I am awake enough to do Schedule 1 later tonight. Anyway, sorry. They hold that wherever he who has once given life, with the perceptions of that life, however faint it be, as in a plant, the life is never destroyed. It passes into new and improved forms. Dang it. Now this is what I get for being the way I am. But you will prefer it this way, and I won't have to use so much of my voice. You might not get it this way. I might have lost my microphones. Oh boy. How do I do this? Oh, there it is. You'll be all right. I believe in you. Your patience is strong. You sit and watch me do and say nothing all day long. I believe in you. I trust in you. I have great faith in your intelligence and your willingness to learn and endure hardship. If you didn't have a high willingness to learn and endure hardship, you just wouldn't be at my channel. You'd be somewhere else, not learning and not enduring the hardship of knowing me. Blink. Okay. It's not how that works. It's never how that works. And we go on. Life passes into new and improved forms, though not in this planet, differing therein from the ordinary doctrine of metempsychosis, and that the living thing retains the sense of identity, so that it connects its past life with its future, and is conscious of its progressive improvement in the scale of joy. For they say that without this assumption they cannot, according to the lights of human reason vouchsafed to them, discover the perfect justice, which must be a constituent quality of the all-wise and the all-good. Injustice, they say, can only emanate from three causes: want of wisdom to perceive what is just, want of benevolence to desire, want of power to fulfill it, and that each of these three once is incompatible in the all-wise, the all-good, the all-powerful, but that while even in this life the wisdom, the benevolence, and the power of the Supreme Being are sufficiently apparent to compel our recognition, the justice necessarily resulting from those attributes absolutely requires another life, not for man only, but for every living thing of the inferior orders, that, alike in the animal and the vegetable world, we see one individual rendered by circumstances beyond its control exceedingly wretched compared to its neighbors. There, wait, only one exists as the prey of another. Even a plant suffers from disease till it perishes prematurely, while the plant next to it rejoices in its vitality and lives out its happy life free from a pang. That it is an erroneous analogy from human infirmities to reply by saying that the Supreme Being only acts by general laws, thereby making his own secondary causes so potent as to mar the essential kindness of the first cause, and a still meaner and more ignorant conception of the all good, to dismiss with a brief contempt all consideration of justice for the myriad forms into which he has infused life, and assume that injustice is only due to the single product of the Arn. There is no small and no great in the eyes of the divine living giver, but once grant that nothing, however humble, which feels that it lives and suffers can perish through the series of ages, that all its suffering here, if continuous from the moments of its birth to that of its transfer to another form of being, would be more brief, compared with eternity, than the cry of the newborn is compared to the whole life of a man. And once suppose that this living thing retains its sense of identity when so transformed, for without that sense it could be aware of no future being, and though indeed the fulfillment of divine justice is removed from the scope of our ken, yet we have a right to assume it to be uniform and universal, and not varying and partial, as it would be if acting only upon general and secondary laws. Beneath such perfect justice flows necessity from perfectness of knowledge to conceive, perfectness of will to love, and perfectness of power to complete it. However fantastic this belief of the Vrilya may be, it tends perhaps to conform politically to systems of government which, admitting different degrees of wealth, yet establishes perfect equality in rank, exquisite mildness in all relations and intercourse, and tenderness to all created things which the good of the community does not require them to destroy. And though their notion of compensation to a tortured insect or a cankered flower may seem to some of us a very wild crochet, yet, at least, is not a mischievous one, and it may furnish matter for no unpleasant reflection to think that within the abysses of earth, never lit by a ray from the material heavens, there should have penetrated so luminous a conviction of the ineffable goodness of the Creator, so fixed an idea that the general law by which he acts cannot admit of any partial injustice or evil, and therefore cannot be comprehended without reference to their action over all space and throughout all time. And since, as I shall have occasion to observe later, the intellectual conditions and social systems of this subterranean race comprise and harmonize great and apparently antagonistic varieties in philosophical doctrine and speculation, which have from time to time been started, discussed, dismissed, and have reappeared amongst thinkers or dreamers in the upper world. So I may perhaps appropriately conclude this reference to the belief of the Vrilya that self-conscious or sentient life once given is indestructible among inferior creatures as well as in man, by an eloquent passage from the work of that eminent zoologist Louis Agassiz, which I have only just met with many years after I had committed to paper these recollections of the life of the Vrilya, which I now reduce into something like arrangement and form. Quote, the relations which individual animals bear to one another are of such a character that they ought long ago to have been considered as sufficient proof that no organized being could ever have been called into existence by other agency than by the direct intervention of a reflective mind. This argues strongly in favor of the existence in every animal of an immaterial principle similar to that which by its excellence and superior endowments places man so much above the animals. Yet the principle unquestionably exists, and whether it be called sense, reason, or instinct, it presents in the whole range of organized beings a series of phenomena closely linked together, and upon it are based not only the higher manifestations of the mind, but the very permanence of the specific differences which characterize every organism. Most of the arguments in favor of the immortality of man apply equally to the permanency of this principle and other living beings. May I not add that a future life in which man would be deprived of that great source of enjoyment and intellectual moral improvement which results from the contemplation of the harmonies of an organic world would involve a lamentable loss? And may we not look to a spiritual concert of the combined worlds and all their inhabitants in the presence of their Creator at the highest conception of paradise? End quote. From Essay on Classification, section 17, page 97 through 99. So it's worth noting here, just real quick, as we go through the history, the sexuality, the philosophy, the hodgepodge of information in a very strange order, that our narrator, and we're going to forget Edward Layton for a moment, as we say that, but we are going to talk about Edward Layton now. And we're going to remember that until Edward Bulwer Lytton, the underworld, the world beneath the surface, as he says in this book, and as John Keel reminded us, was a place of the dead. It was where the dead resided. It was a world of fairies, and the fairies were understood as semi-malevolent, quasi-malevolent, largely malevolent, mostly malevolent, malevolent, not evil, but also kind of evil. Kind of malevolent and evil. Malevolent. Non-human, actually. Hyper-intelligent, malevolent, non-human entities. These dwarves, elves, whatever, denizens of the underworld, demons. And as when he talks about the philosophies of the overworld contending with where evil came from, he's talking pretty much exclusively about the Book of Enoch. He's talking about the idea that evil came from beings that once lived in the sky, came and lived on the earth, and then were punished to live beneath the earth for their iniquities. And then the alternate historians and ancient aliens crowds have alternatively used this book to argue the historicity of the history claims or the truth claims of the Book of Enoch. And they've used this to say that this actually was something that actually happened to Edward Bulwer Lytton, that this isn't fiction, that this is actually nonfiction, high-level nonfiction, because of the degree to which he wrote out their philosophies and their politics. And so it's important to note, especially with that last one, when he's talking about the virtue of their philosophies and their way of life, and that he takes time to remind you that they have a more virtuous way of life than you do. He's doing that because for 2,000 years or much longer, the underworld was where the dead and largely or mostly malevolent things existed. Things that were malevolent to you, if not outright evil by their natures, certainly malevolent to you, were in the underground. And what Edward Bulwer Lytton here is doing is a sort of not telling you that it was actually a counter propagandist, fake news sort of misinformation loop that led you to believe that. Because Edward Bulwer Lytton doesn't have that. He doesn't have that language. He doesn't have that idea, those nested ideas to explain how it came that this people that live under the ground came to be the explanation for all things that are evil, even though they live a higher virtue and a higher justice life than the life on the surface. He doesn't have all that. The people that read this book over the course of the next century and a half or whatever, they developed it trying to explain how this could be nonfiction. And so it's important to remember that what he is doing is saying that the underground people are actually not evil, because he's already talked about how atheism is a kind of religion itself, and that rejecting the sky gods is still itself saying that there's something there to be rejected. And he's doing that because this is intentionally calling question to what the Catholic Church believed in his time, and what the Protestant non-denominational churches were teaching in this time period. Chapter 15. Kind to me, as I found all in this household, the young daughter of my host was the most considerate and thoughtful in her kindness. At her suggestion, I laid aside the habiliments in which I had descended from the upper earth, and adopted the dress of the Vrilya, with the exception of the artful wings which served them when on foot as a graceful mantle. But as many of the Vrilya, when occupied in urban pursuits, did not wear these wings, this exception created no marked difference between myself and the race among whom I sojourned, and I was thus enabled to visit the town without exciting unpleasant curiosity. Out of the household, no one suspected that I had come from the upper world, and I was but regarded as one of some inferior and barbarous tribe whom Aflin entertained as a guest. The city was large in proportion to the territory around it, which was of no greater extent than many an English or Hungarian nobleman's estate, but the whole of it, to the verge of the rocks which constituted its boundary, was cultivated to the nicest degree, except where certain allotments of mountain and pasture were humanely left free to the sustenance of the harmless animals they had tamed, though not for domestic use. So great of their kindness towards these humbler creatures, that a sum is devoted from the public treasury for the purpose of deporting them to other Vrilya communities, willing to receive them, chiefly new colonies, whenever they became too numerous for the pastures allotted to them in their native place. They do not, however, multiply to an extent comparable to the ratio at which, with us, animals bred for slaughter increase. It seems a law of nature that animals not useful to man gradually recede from the domains he occupies, or even become extinct. It is an old custom of the various sovereign states amidst which the race of the Vrilya are distributed, to leave between each state a neutral and uncultivated borderland. In the instance of the community I speak of, this tract, being a ridge of savage rocks, was impassable by foot, but was easily surmounted whether by the wings of the inhabitants or the airboats, of which I shall speak hereafter. Roads through it were also cut for the transit of vehicles impelled by vril. These intercommunicating tracts were kept always lighted, and the expense thereof defrayed by a special tax, to which all the communities comprehended in the denomination of Vrilya contribute in settled proportions. By these means, a considerable commercial traffic with other states, both near and distant, was carried on. The surplus wealth on this special community was chiefly agricultural. The community was also eminent for skill in constructing implements connected with the arts of husbandry. In exchange for such merchandise, it obtained articles more of luxury than necessity. There were few things imported on which they set a higher price than birds taught to pipe artful tunes in concert These were brought from a great distance, and were marvelous for beauty of song and plumage. I understand that extraordinary care was taken by their breeders and teachers in selection, and that the species had wonderfully improved during the last few years. I saw no other pet animals among this community except some very amusing and sportive creatures of the Bactrian species, resembling frogs, but with very intelligent countenances, which the children were fond of, and kept in their private gardens. They appear to have no animals akin to our dogs. There it is. Akin to our dogs or horses, though though that learned naturalist Z informed me that such creatures had once existed in those parts, and might now be found in regions inhabited by other races than the Vrilya. She said that they had gradually disappeared from the more civilized world since the discovery of Vril, and the results attending that discovery had dispensed with their uses. Machinery and the invention of wings had superseded the horse as a beast of burden, and the dog was no longer wanted either for protection or the chase, as it had been when the ancestors of the Vrilya feared the aggression of their own kind, or hunted the lesser animals for food. It's funny. Uh, Edward Bulwer-Lytton couldn't imagine dogs as pets, which is the lives they live now. Indeed, however, so far as the horse was concerned, this region was so rocky that a horse could have been, there, of little use either for pastime or burden. The only creature they use for the latter purpose is a kind of large goat, which is more employed or much employed on farms. The nature of the surrounding soil in these districts may be said to have first suggested the invention of wings and airboats. The largeness of space in proportion to the space occupied by the city was occasioned by the custom of surrounding every house with a separate garden. The broad main street in which Af Lin dwelt expanded into a vast square, in which were placed the College of Sages and all the public offices. A magnificent fountain of the luminous field, which I call Naphtha. I am ignorant of its real nature, in the center. All these public edifices have a uniform character of massiveness and solidity. They reminded me of the architectural pictures of Martin. Along the upper stories of each ran a balcony, or rather a terraced garden, supported by columns, filled with flowering plants, and tenanted by many kinds of tame birds. From the square branched several streets, all broad and brilliantly lighted, and descending up the eminence on either side. In my excursions in the town, I was never allowed to go alone. Aflin or his daughter was my habitual companion. In his community, the adult guy was seen walking with any young Arn as familiarly as if there were no difference in the sexes. The retail shops are not very numerous. The persons who attend on a customer are all children of various ages and exceedingly intelligent and courteous, but without the least touch of importunity or cringing. The shopkeeper himself might or might not be visible. When visible, he seemed rarely employed on any matter connected with his professional business, and yet he had taken to that business from special liking for it, and quite independently of his general sources of fortune. The Arna of the community are, on the whole, an independent set of beings after the active age of childhood. Whether by temperament or philosophy, they rank repose among the chief blessings of life. Indeed, when you take away from a human being the incentives to action which are found in cupidity or ambition, it seems to me no wonder that he rests quiet. In their ordinary movements, they prefer the use of their feet to that of their wings. But for their sports, or to indulge in a bold misuse of terms, their public promenades, they employ the latter. Also for the aerial dances I have described, as well as for visiting their country places, which are mostly placed on lofty heights. And when still young, they prefer their wings for travel into the other regions of the Arna to vehicular conveyances. Those who accustom themselves to flight can fly, if less rapidly than some birds, yet from 25 to 30 miles an hour, and keep up that rate for 5 or 6 hours at a stretch. But the Arna generally, on reaching middle age, are not fond of rapid movements requiring violent exercise. Perhaps for this reason, as they hold a doctrine which our own physicians will doubtless approve, viz., that regular transpiration through the pores of the skin is essential to death, they habitually use the sweating baths, to which we give the name Turkish or Roman, succeeded by douches of perfumed waters. They have great faith in the salubrious virtue of certain perfumes. It is their custom also, at stated but rare periods, perhaps 4 times a year when in health, to use a bath charged with vril. They consider that this fluid, sparingly used, is a great sustainer of life, but used in excess, when in the normal state of health, rather tends to reaction and exhausted vitality. For nearly all their diseases, however, they resort to it as the chief assistant to nature in throwing off their complaint. In their own way, they are the most luxurious of people, but all their luxuries are innocent. They may be said to dwell in an atmosphere of music and fragrance. Every room has its mechanical contrivances for melodious sounds, usually tuned down to soft murmured notes, which seem like sweet whispers from invisible spirits. They are too accustomed to these gentle sounds to find them a hindrance to conversation, nor, when alone, to reflection. But they have a notion that to breathe an air filled with continuous melody and perfume has necessarily an effect at once soothing and elevating upon the formation of character and the habits of thought. Though so temperate and with total abstinence from other animal food than milk and from all intoxicating drinks, they are delicate and dainty to an extreme in food and beverage, and in all their sports, even the old exhibit a childlike gaiety. Perhaps, happiness is the end at which they aim, not as the excitement of a moment, but as the prevailing condition of the entire existence. And regard for the happiness of each other is evinced by the exquisite amenity of their manners. Their conformation of skull has marked differences from that of any known races in the upper world, though I cannot help thinking it a development in the course of countless ages of the brachycephalic type of the age of Stone and Lyell's Elements of Geology, CX P 113, as compared with the dolichocephalic type of the beginning of the age of iron, correspondent with that now so prevalent among us and called the Celtic type. It is the same comparative massiveness of forehead, not receding like the Celtic, the same even roundness in the frontal organs, but it is far loftier in the apex and far less pronounced in the hinder cranial hemisphere, where phrenologists place the animal organs. To speak as a phrenologist, the cranium common to the Vril has the organs of weight, number, tune, form, order, causality very largely developed, that of construction much more pronounced than that of ideality. Those which are called the moral organs, such as conscientiousness and benevolence, are amazingly full. Amativeness and combativeness are both small, adhesiveness large. The organ of destructiveness, i.e., of determined clearance of intervening obstacles, immense, but less than that of benevolence, and their philo, philoprogenitiveness takes rather the character of compassion and tenderness to things that need aid or protection than of the animal love of offspring. I never met with one person deformed or misshapen. The beauty of their countenances is not only in symmetry of feature, but in smoothness of surface, which continues without line or wrinkle to the extreme of old age, and serene sweetness of expression combined with that majesty which seems to come from consciousness of power and the freedom of all terror, physical or moral. It is that very sweetness combined with that majesty which inspired in a beholder like myself, accustomed to strive with the passions of mankind, a sentiment of humiliation, of awe, of dread. It is such an expression as a painter might give to a demigod, a genius, an angel. The males of the Vrilya are entirely beardless. The Gai sometimes in old age develop a small mustache. I was surprised to find that the color of their skin was not uniformly that which I had remarked in those individuals whom I had first encountered, some being much fairer and even with blue eyes, and hair of a deep golden auburn, though still of complexions warmer or richer in tone than persons in the north of Europe. I was told that this admixture of coloring arose from intermarriage with other and more distant tribes of the Vrilya, who, whether by the accident of climate or early distinction of race, were of fairer hues than the tribes of which this community formed one. Of which this community formed one. It was considered that the dark red skin showed the most ancient family of Arna, but they attached no sentiment of pride to that antiquity, and, on the contrary, believed their present excellence of breed came from frequent crossings with other families, differing yet akin, and they encouraged such intermarriages, always provided that it be with the Vrilya nations. Nations which, not conforming their manners and institutions to those of the Vrilya, nor indeed held capable of acquiring the powers over the Vril, agencies which it had taken them generations to attain and transmit, were regarded with more disdain than the citizens of New York regard the Negroes. I learned from Z, who had more lore in all matters than any male with whom I was brought into a familiar converse, that the superiority of the Vrilya was supposed to have originated in the intensity of their earlier struggles against obstacles in nature amidst the localities in which they had first settled. Wherever, said Z, moralizing, wherever goes on that, wherever goes on that early process in the history of civilization by which life is made a struggle. It's cold. The sentence doesn't make sense. By which life is made a struggle in which the individual has to put forth all his powers to compete with his fellow, we invariably find this result, viz., since in the competition a vast number must perish, nature selects for preservation only the strongest specimens. Oh, he's making a survival of the fittest argument. With our race, therefore, even before the discovery of Vril, only the highest organizations were preserved, and there is among our ancient books a legend, once popularly believed, that we were driven from a region that seems to denote the world you come from. Whoops. In order to perfect our condition and attain to the purest elimination of our species by the severity of the struggles our forefathers underwent, and that, when our education shall become finally completed, we are destined to return to the upper world and supplant all the inferior races now existing therein. Aflin and Z often conversed with me in private upon the political and social conditions of that upper world, in which Z so philosophically assumed that the inhabitants were to be exterminated one day or other by the advent of the Vrilya. They found in my accounts, in which I continue to do all I could without launching into falsehood so positive that they would have been easily detected by the shrewdness of my listeners, to present our powers and ourselves in the most flattering points of view, perpetual subject of comparison between our most civilized populations and the meaner subterranean races which they considered hopelessly plunged in barbarism and doomed to gradual certain extinction. But they both agreed in desiring to conceal from their community all premature opening into the regions lighted by the sun. Both were humane and shrunk from the thought of annihilating so many millions of creatures, and the pictures I drew of our life, highly colored as they were, saddened them. In vain I boasted of our great men, poets, philosophers, orators, generals, and defied the Vrilya to produce their equals. Alas, said Z, this predominance of the few over the many is the surest and most fatal sign of a race incorrigibly savage. See you not that the primary condition of mortal happiness consists in the extinction of that strife and competition between individuals, which, no matter what forms of government they adopt, render the many subordinate to the few, destroy real liberty to the individual, whatever may be the nominal liberty of the state, and annul that calm of existence without which felicity, mental or bodily, cannot be attained. Our notion is that the more we can assimilate life to the existence which our noblest ideas conceive to be that of spirits on the other side of the grave, why, the more we approximate to a divine happiness here, and the more easily we glide into the conditions of being hereafter. For surely all we can imagine of the life of gods, or of blessed immortals, supposed the absence of self-made cares and contentious passions, such as avarice and ambition, It seems to us that it must be a life of serene tranquility, not indeed without active occupations of the intellectual or spiritual powers, but occupations of whatsoever nature they be, congenial to the idiosyncrasies of each, not forced and repugnant, a life gladdened by the untrammeled interchange of gentle affections, in which the moral atmosphere utterly kills hate and vengeance, and strife and rivalry. Such is the political state to which all the tribes and families of the Vrilya seek to attain, and towards that goal all our theories of government are shaped. You see how utterly opposed is such a progress to that of the uncivilized nations from which you come, and which aim at a systematic perpetuity of troubles and cares and warring passions, aggravated more and more as their progress storms its way forward. The most powerful of all the races in our world, beyond the pale of the Vrilya, esteems itself the best governed of all political societies, and to have reached in that respect the extreme end at which political wisdom can arrive, so that the other nations should tend more or less to copy it. It has established on its broadest base the kumpash, viz., the government of the ignorant upon the principle of being the most numerous. It has placed the supreme bliss in the vying with each other in all things, so that the evil passions are never in repose, vying for power, for wealth, for eminence of some kind. And in this rivalry it is horrible to hear the vituperation, the slanders, the calumnies, which even the best and mildest among them heap on each other without remorse or shame. Some years ago, said Aflin, I visited this people, and their misery and degradation were the more appalling because they were always boasting of their felicity and grandeur as it compared with the rest of their species. And there is no hope that this people, which evidently resembles your own, can improve, because all their notions tend to further deterioration. They desire to enlarge their dominion more and more in direct antagonism to the truth that, beyond a very limited range, it is impossible to secure to a community the happiness which belongs to a well-ordered family. And the more they mature a system by which a few individuals are heated and swollen to a size above the standard slenderness of the millions, the more they chuckle and exact and cry out, see by what great exceptions to the common littleness of our race, we prove the magnificent results of our system. In fact, returned Z, if the wisdom of human life be to approximate to the serene equality of immortals, there can be no more direct flying off into the opposite direction than a system which aims at carrying to the utmost the inequalities and turbulences of mortals. Nor do I see how, by any forms of religious belief, mortals so acting could fit themselves even to appreciate the joys of immortals, to which they still expect to be transferred by the mere act of dying. On the contrary, minds accustomed to place happiness in things so much the reverse of godlike would find the happiness of gods exceedingly dull, and would long to get back to a world in which they could quarrel with one another. He footnoted this somewhere, and I'll find where he footnoted it and why. I didn't notice the footnote while I was reading. That's the end of the chapter, by the way. This is not a good book. There it is. Okay, so he footnoted this passage earlier in the chapter. It's their custom also, at stated but rare periods, perhaps 4 times a year, when in health, to use a charged bath with vril. He footnotes this. I once tried the effect of the vril bath. It was very similar in its invigorating powers to the baths at Gatzin, the virtues of which are ascribed by many physicians to electricity. But though similar, the effect of the vril bath was more lasting. So there you go. If you're not a well-traveled 19th century rich person, go fuck yourself. You just don't get to know what he's talking about there, because I sure as fuck don't know what he's talking about there. And that is that. Thank you for watching. Future audience, thank you for swinging back around and checking it out. The people who stopped through to say dumb shit, go fuck yourself. Keep yourself that way, please. And the rest of you, have a good night.